Well, hello everybody and welcome to today's MTPConnect seminar series, first one for 2021. So thanks for joining us right on time. My name is Libby and I will be your Zoom host for today. So what I will be doing though is handing over to the fabulous Dr. Duncan McInnes to launch the session. Duncan, do we have you there?
Thanks, Libby. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. It's great to see so many of you here online. This webinar, Collaboration for Innovation CRC-P Grants for Medical Product Manufacturing, is co-presented by MTPConnect, Australia's Industry Growth Centre for Medical Technologies, Pharmaceutical, Biotechnology and the Digital Health sectors, and the BioMelbourne Network, an industry-led organisation that aims to foster links between organisations involved in biotechnology in Victoria. Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, MTPConnect acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, some housekeeping rules before we get into things. A lot of today's session will be an opportunity to present questions to our panelists. You can submit those questions via the Q&A box, not the chat box. You can submit anonymously, but please just be aware that if you do and we're unable to get to your question, we won't be able to follow up with you. If you have the same question as someone else, you can upvote by clicking on the question and access it that way. This webinar will be recorded and made available as both an on-demand video and also via our MTPConnect podcast, which you can access via Apple Podcasts, Spotify and all the usual places. Now, in 2020, MTPConnect delivered 2 reports outlining the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our sector. In the first half of last year, up to 90% of clinical trials were put on hold, elective surgeries were delayed, and supply chain integrity for many companies was compromised as international borders closed and air freight ground to a halt. Our report outlines the key role the MTP sector played in responding to the pandemic, with industry working closely with federal, state and territory governments to develop local manufacturing capabilities for essential medical equipment and supplies, such as ventilators and PPE. The fragility of our supply chains that was brought into such sharp relief has been identified as an opportunity to help Australia out of the COVID economic slump. And in October last year, the federal government released its Modern Manufacturing Strategy, or MMS. The strategy identifies 6 national manufacturing priorities. They are resources, technology and critical minerals processing, food and beverage, recycling and clean energy, defence, space, and medical products. Round 11 of the Cooperative Research Centres Projects grant scheme is now open, and up to 70% of the funding will be set aside for projects that address these priority areas. Our session today will cover CRC-P scheme, the MMS, medical product manufacturing and manufacturing more broadly. Today we're joined by Martin Dent, Project Manager for CRC-P Projects, Shay Chalmers, Director and Owner of Strategic Engineering Australia, Adrian March, Assistant Manager in the Industry Engagement Branch of DISA, and Laura Ling, Senior Policy Officer from the Department's Manufacturing Division. I'm going to start by asking our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we're going to move to some pre-prepared questions that we have before moving on to audience Q&A. Martin, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself first, please.
Thanks very much, Duncan. It's great to be here with everyone. I'm the Program Manager, like Duncan said, of the CRC project stream of the CRC program in the Department of Industry, Science and Engineering Resources. I've been with the CRC program in various different ways since 2009, and I've been working on the CRC project stream since it was first sort of flagged in 2015 and started in 2016. So in total, I've been through 10 rounds of the CRC projects. My team, we look after the whole stream of the CRC projects. We work with various colleagues in our department to develop the program guidelines and supporting materials and develop the application forms to open up the rounds. We coordinate all the application processes, coordinating the assessments with our CRC advisory committee. We help them consider applications and then support them in making the recommendations to the Minister. We negotiate all the grant funding agreements, and then we do all the contract management around all the CRC projects that exist. We've been running rounds every 6 months since the program started, so that means a lot of these things are happening in parallel. We're often negotiating grant agreements at the same time as having the current round open for assessment or developing the next round while the current one's being worked on. And so all of that means we've got at the moment, we've got 114 CRC projects at varying stages, from ones about to start from the last round through to ones that are providing us their final reports. So it's been, it's a pretty dynamic area, but it's been good fun working in it. So thanks very much, Duncan.
Fantastic, Martin. Great to have you on board. Next up, I'd like to introduce Shay Chalmers. Shay, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Duncan. Hi, everyone. My name is Shay, and my passion is to broaden ideas and opportunities for Australia's manufacturing industry. I'm the owner and director of Strategic Engineering Australia, and we offer consulting expertise across a wide range of manufacturing applications with a strong focus on medical manufacturing. I wear a number of different hats and hold a number of different board and committee positions, including non-executive director for the Queensland Manufacturing Institute. I'm also a member for the Queensland Manufacturing Ministerial Advisory Council, and I sit on a number of university advisory boards as well as private companies. As far as manufacturing experience, I've worked across the world, from plastics to steel mills in the US to medical devices across the Asia Pacific region. So I've got a pretty broad manufacturing experience. Look forward to the discussions today. Thanks, Duncan.
Thanks for joining us, Shay. Adrian, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, Duncan. So I am one of the assistant managers in the industry engagement branch at the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources in the new manufacturing division. So the manufacturing area was set up in the second half of last year following the announcement of the modern manufacturing strategy. So I've been in that area since about mid-year, firstly working on the strategy and now kind of transitioning across into a role where my team is working to implement various elements of the strategy across the division. My kind of day-to-day role has over the last couple of months has been working in a very small team, working with an industry-led task force who have been developing the medical products National Manufacturing Priority Roadmap. So we've been doing that over the last couple of months, and we're kind of transitioning into kind of a few other work streams as that work concludes, which we're hoping to conclude relatively soon, and also so looking at kind of implementing a kind of range of other areas under the strategy, which I'm happy to talk to in more detail as we continue the discussion.
Thanks so much, Adrian. And finally, Laura, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everybody. My name's Laura Ling. I work with Adrian March in the Industry Engagement branch. I was involved in the creation of the modern manufacturing strategy, and I've been helping to deliver the medical products roadmap. I'm really passionate about helping businesses to scale and grow, and I've helped to champion this in roles based in Canberra, Darwin and Adelaide. I really look forward to the discussions today and hearing everybody's thoughts.
Thanks so much, Laura. And thanks to both Adrian and Laura who've stepped in at the last minute after the sickness of a colleague. So I really appreciate that. Martin, I'm going to start things off with a question for you. Can you please introduce the CRC-P scheme and discuss the intended outcomes?
Sure, Duncan. So apologies for those that know the CRC program back to front and the CRC-Ps, but I'll just go back to a little bit of the basics very quickly. So the broader CRC program has been around for over 30 years now. The program's about solving industry problems through the high quality collaborative research. It's an industry-led program. It has two elements. Firstly, the CRCs, which have been around since the start. They're the ones that operate for up to 10 years. Funding averages around about $40 million per CRC, and we hold one round of that per year. And they're typically addressing whole of sector industry problems. The CRC project stream, which we're focusing on today, it was established in 2015. It enables more shorter term and smaller projects in the CRCs. It provides a stream of accessible funding to businesses to address their challenges. So it's probably more a industry focused on an individual firm rather than the whole of sector. And its funding is capped at $3 million up to 3 years, and we've been holding 2 rounds a year since 2016 of that. Match funding is required, but this can be in the form of cash or in kind. In terms of the matching to the grant, I'll maybe get an opportunity later to talk about a bit more about. Often the funding is much more than the match funding. All projects must be led by an Australian industry entity. That essentially means someone that has an ABN and that's trading. And when we say trading, we mean buying and selling goods or services, or intending to buy goods or services. Each of the projects must also have a second industry partner, and one of them too must be a small or medium business that have less than 200 employees. You also must have an industry partner involved to be eligible to apply for a CRC project. That can be Australian university, a Commonwealth, state or territory entity which undertakes research, such as the CSIRO or the Australian Institute of Marine Science as examples, or you can also be a medical research institute and qualify as a research partner. And at the moment, we currently have round 11 open. It's open for nearly 2 weeks now, and that closes on 25 March. That's a very high-level summary of what the CRC projects, but I look forward to answering any further questions later on.
Perfect, thank you. So two commercial entities, 1 research partner, and I think for any potential applicants out there, the 2 points that Martin made early on is it's industry-led and it solves problems. Keep those things as your mantra all the way through, I think. Secondly, Martin, so up to 70% of the funding for round 11 will be for projects that address the national manufacturing priorities. There's also funding dedicated to regional projects. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, so that's the regional initiative's new within our program for this time. It's the first time we've run it. So we've been working with the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications for this element of the program, and it's about assisting regional Australia. There's an additional funding for up to 2 projects. So then projects could be both of the maximum amount of $3 million, and it's supporting the government's decentralisation agenda. So this means the eligibility for these is restricted to projects which are based in regional Australia, and there are also a requirement that one of the industry partners is relocating from a capital city for the duration of the project to a regional area. In terms of when we say capital city, the specific details are in our guidelines, but we essentially mean the cities of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide or Perth, or the whole of the ACT, relocating from one of them places to a regional area which is defined as anywhere else. So but if you read the guidelines, there's specific detail on what ABS boundary data we're using to determine that, or we can give you some specific advice on that if you need it. More broadly, if you're going to be competitive in this stream, we're expecting you to applicants to be able to demonstrate benefits more broadly in the region. This may include things like economic impacts, such as increased jobs, opportunities for growth, but there's also social benefits will be taken into account, such as the enhancing livability in the regional area, improving social inclusion, and potentially addressing disadvantage. In terms of the process we'll use for these applications, they'll be assessed alongside all other applications in round 11, but the funding will be applied separately. So essentially the two best applications from that element are expected to be recommended for funding.
Fantastic, thanks for that extra information. Adrian, a question for you. Can you please introduce the modern manufacturing strategy and what it aims to achieve?
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. So I'm sure that most of the people on this call are aware that the modern manufacturing strategy was launched by the Prime Minister and Minister Karen Andrews around about the time of the October budget last year. So it's been around for about 5 or 6 months now. So it's a new strategy, which is a whole of government strategy, which is looking to help Australian manufacturers scale up, become more competitive and also become more resilient. And the kind of primary role is it's looking at making Australia a high quality and sustainable manufacturing nation. And so that both manufacturing can deliver positive economic outcomes for all Australians, but also kind of obviously in the current times of COVID, there's been a real focus on the ability of manufacturing to create jobs. So there was 4 main pillars under the strategy. The first one was getting the economic conditions right for business. Partly that was around COVID recovery and a lot of the economic support measures that government provided as part of the October budget and COVID recovery through 2020. And part of that is some kind of longer term reform measures around energy costs, tax, cutting red tape. The second pillar is making science and technology work for industry, and that's around a kind of longer term program to align research and innovation capabilities and programs and priority areas, and also unlocking kind of future investment through some of the funding, which I'm happy to step through. The third pillar was around focusing on areas of comparative advantage, and that is really around setting 6 national manufacturing priority areas. I'm very glad you outlined them in your introduction, Duncan, because that's usually my test, is to remember all 6, but happy to kind of speak to the detail around those if that's of interest around those priorities. And so that's really kind of about backing projects where government sees there's kind of high potential to deliver on those outcomes around economic benefit and creating jobs and also resilience. And finally, the final pillar is around building national resilience for a strong economy. So that's really quite focused on supply chains. Obviously, COVID taught us a few lessons around, the potential for disruption and the impact of disruption. And so there's a piece of work that's going on that is looking at making the Australian economy more resilient in the future, for a variety of disruptions, not just looking at the COVID pandemic, but being very forward-looking and taking a range of steps so that, those disruptions have less impact on, Australian citizens, really. Might leave talking around the funding connected to all those pieces. So there's $1.5 billion total in funding, which is cut up in a couple of different ways, which I'm happy to step through maybe a little bit later. Probably the one to briefly touch on is, as part of the 6 national manufacturing priorities, there's been 6 roadmaps for each of those priorities. And that really sets out a kind of industry and government vision for the next 10 years. And so it's looking at, what kind of steps government and industry needs to take together to get to those goals. So it's a little bit of a piece of, looking at kind of where we're at now across those priority areas, and in 10 years' time, what would be like the sector to look like, and some of the steps that we need to take in between. I'd probably really focus that that's been a really industry-led process. We've had a kind of some really good industry engagement on that. And so it's really focusing on when industry and government co-invest together, what are some of the opportunities that we can unlock?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. We've had a comment in the Q&A from Andre that there is an information session on the National Manufacturing Initiative later on this afternoon. But another question for you, Andrew. So the MMS outlines other projects that are intended to support manufacturing in Australia. These include, as you've mentioned, the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, the Cybersecurity Connect and Protect program. But can you tell us a little bit more about the National Manufacturing Initiative? We've seen that the roadmap for space came out, I think, late last week, early this week. Can you tell us a bit about the funding that's there and the various ways that people can access that?
Yeah, no, we'd be really keen to talk about that. So the Modern Manufacturing Initiative, MMI, that's really the centerpiece of the modern manufacturing strategy. So it's $1.3 billion in total funding. And that's kind of split into 3 main streams. The first of which is the manufacturing translation stream, and that's looking at supporting projects that basically take good Australian ideas and turn them into either new or enhanced commercial products. The second stream is the integration stream, and that's really looking at supporting Australian businesses integrating or accessing domestic or global supply chains, or kind of upgrading their position into new areas of the value chain for themselves, which I'm sure Shay might talk to a little bit later today. And the final is the collaboration stream. And that's kind of looking at very large projects which support either business to business or business to research collaboration. And that stream hasn't come online yet. So I'll kind of give you a little bit more detail about the two other streams. But that stream hasn't come online yet, but it's kind of looking at very large transformational projects. Don't want to speak to too much detail on that. I would anticipate that would be looking at things like, consortia and that kind of thing. So that's kind of coming soon, but don't have too much detail on that just yet. In terms of the two other streams, the translation stream and the integration stream. So the space, the guidelines for the space priority area and the space roadmap, they came out last Friday at about 9 o'clock. So funding has opened for businesses in the kind of space manufacturing priority area. If I really encourage the people on this call to have a look at those guidelines. They give a pretty good idea of the thinking around the types of activities that we're looking to support. There will be bespoke guidelines for medical manufacturing businesses. We're hoping that those will be released very soon. There is a little bit of sequencing involved in that, just in terms of being able to open these rounds of funding kind of as quickly as possible in the current environment. Those will be sequenced. So as the guidelines and roadmaps are ready, we're opening them up. So expecting medical to be coming out very shortly. There won't be kind of too much, there won't be any disadvantage really between businesses. They'll kind of be, all open for the same amount of time, assessed, using the same methods and processes, and there'll be follow-up rounds. So there isn't really too much concern around, those being sequenced. I know there's kind of some people have been really, really keen to see the medical roadmap and guidelines. But yeah, so around that, across the translation and integration streams, there's around 400 million in grants that will be available. That's at a 2-to-1 funding basis. The minimum Commonwealth grant is 1 million. So that would be a $2 million project. Yep. And then that would be a maximum grant of 20 million. So a maximum project size of around 40 million. So happy to kind of take some more audience questions on the kind of integration and translation streams in the Q&A, but I might leave it there. Duncan.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Adrian. So Andre, to your question about when there will be an information session on the MMI for medical products, I think that will be when the roadmap is released. There will be another opportunity to learn about that then. Shay, you're our manufacturing expert, and Libby, I'm just going to ask you to bring up our pre-prepared slide for Shay here. Prominent in the MMS is the SMILE curve. Can you explain what this is and how it's relevant to the production of medical products, please?
Sure can, Duncan. It's a big question, so just bear with me as I try to answer it. I might just start with a bit of background on the smiley curve, just to give it context. This concept was first proposed almost 30 years ago by Stan Shi, who was the founder of Acer. And at the time, they were a manufacturing-focused business. So according to Shi, in the personal computer industry, the two ends of the value chain, product conception, which is the design and development side, and marketing or sales, command higher value to the product than the middle part of the value chain, which is manufacturing. So based on this concept, Acer adopted a business strategy to reorient itself from a manufacturing-focused business into a global marketing of brand name PC-related products and services. They invested heavily in R&D to develop innovative technology. And the concept later became widely cited to describe the distribution of value-adding potentials in other types of industries, and is used to justify business strategies aimed at higher value-adding activities. Now, the reason this is so important for us here in Australia is that focusing on value add is one of the key elements for success in our tech companies. This is even more important with regards to the production of medical products. The overheads for medtech manufacturers are significantly higher than that of other manufacturing industries due to the cost of compliance from a quality systems and a regulatory perspective. This is incredibly important to understand if you're a manufacturing company pivoting into the medtech space, as we've seen a lot of during the COVID response, or if you're starting your journey to commercialize a product that has a medtech application. Designing your product and process to compete on value and not on price is critical. Ensuring that you're solving a problem that your customer is willing to pay for the solution. Now, I know that sounds simple, but understanding who your customer is, which does seem simple, sometimes in the medtech space can actually be different to the patient in which you're solving a problem for. So it can become quite a complex ecosystem in this space of medtech as who's paying for your product versus who you're solving the problem for. So it's something that I really recommend spending a decent amount of time analyzing and understanding what that reimbursement and commercial operation looks like. But what we can learn from the Smiley curve is a couple of things. Nearly half the jobs in Australian manufacturing are outside production roles. And also, there is a significant amount of value added to our manufacturing value chain through research and development, customer-centered design, and this is why projects like CRC-Ps are so important. So just one final comment on this, as this is something I encounter all the time with medtech startups when looking to transfer to manufacture. Developing a quality product is not enough to deliver a commercially successful business. And it's really important to have this mindset whether you're applying for a grant or starting a new business. Before we even start on the design and development journey, we must have an articulated, a clear value proposition combined with a differentiated market position. Now, ultimately, what this boils down to is, does somebody care enough about the problem that you're trying to solve to pay for a solution? So I might just leave it there, Duncan.
Thanks so much, Shay. It's a fantastic answer. I really appreciate that. I guess the other thing for people to understand with the SMILE curve is that your preclinical work, your clinical trial work is all part of the manufacturing process, even if it is pre-production work. Shay, I think you touched on it a little bit in that answer, but unavoidably, manufacturing involves making things. Are there any other key messages that we can take from the MMS about where Australian manufacturers should focus their efforts in order to compete on a global stage?
Thanks, Duncan. It's a great question. Personally, I'm really passionate about seeing Australia play to our strengths. We can't be everything to everyone, but I believe we can be world-class if we choose to prioritise and focus in our areas of expertise. So the modern manufacturing strategy has outlined the 6 national manufacturing priorities, and they align quite closely with a lot of the states that have similar priorities as well. So I think that that's a really good indication that those areas have been identified as areas where we can play to our strengths, where we can leverage our intellectual IP and our ability to translate innovative ideas in areas that are of global importance. So I'd really strongly support everybody who's on this webinar to review the national priorities and think about how you can focus your efforts and capability in your business in these critical areas, because I do believe that these are the areas that will lead to a successful manufacturing industry here in Australia. I guess it kind of leans into our manufacturing strength is really in that high value, high quality products, which place a strong emphasis on delivering innovative solutions to global problems. It's not about us competing with each other here in Australia. We will succeed when we work together and collaborate to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So a CRC-P is a really nice way to collaborate between industry and university institutions to create solve a new challenge, I think.
Thanks, Shay. That's a fantastic answer again. It brings me on to my next question. So MTPConnect recently released a report on the interim findings of our READY sector-wide skills gap analysis. One area where CRC-P applicants often have trouble is in articulating the workforce training and opportunities that their project provides. Can you tell us about some of the skills gaps that you see Australia has to address in medical products manufacturing?
Sure. So I think there's probably a couple of elements to that question. And when we're looking at workforce training opportunities for your project that your project will create, there's probably a few rules of thumb. And of course, these will differ for every project, but generally, for every 10 jobs you create in production in manufacturing, another 3 will be created in the greater supply chain. And for every 1 production worker that you have, you will at least create 1 additional role within your company as a support role. So obviously these ratios change depending on the level of automation, but typically when you're looking at medtech projects, the workforce skills required to deliver these projects could be quality control and assurance engineers, regulatory professionals, logistics staff, sales staff, customer service. And depending on your type of product and production, you might also have maintenance staff, calibration technicians, service engineers, operations, manufacturing management, and even supply control staff and post-market product support, just to name a few. So when you're going through your grant application, I encourage you to really think about what are the roles that are required to deliver this project, and think a bit more broadly than just research and development or just manufacturing, because there's a lot of ancillary roles in medtech that are required to deliver that outcome. As for the skills gaps, supporting our STEM skills pipeline is an area I spend a lot of my time in. Unfortunately, we have some gaping holes in both our current and our future STEM workforce. In manufacturing, we're struggling to get both early stage apprentices and experienced staff, both with either vocational or tertiary qualified. From a medtech perspective, COVID has created a number of compounding challenges and opportunities, but I guess the inability to source skills from overseas, in addition to the increased demand for skills in the medical device development and manufacturing areas, has created some challenges in the skills space. It's all been driven by really phenomenal work, but we've seen a lot of manufacturers pivot into medtech. We've seen PPE manufacturers and support companies popping up all around the country to support this initiative, but it has created quite a significant skills gap for us. As outlined in the READY report, people with an understanding of quality management systems and experience on how to apply it to commercialize a medical device, it's incredibly hard to come by at the moment. But just as a word of advice on that one, even though these skills are challenging to find at the moment, there are ways to get around this. One thing that I've seen work well is partnering. So the requirements for medical devices in general are well outlined in the standards. Find a person with the right mindset for compliance and a willingness to learn, and get them to sit down and read the standards. I know it sounds dry, but there are people who are quite passionate about this side of things. And what you can do is use that foundation it is a skill that can be learned, compliance activities. And when you partner them with an expert in the area, who can provide overview and feedback rather than developing the quality system for you. So I just recommend thinking a little bit more creatively about how you can leverage our graduates and upskill them in this area, whilst partnering them with somebody who might support 1 day a week as opposed to a full-time role. So I'll leave it there, Duncan, but I hope that helps.
That's fantastic. As part of our role as a stakeholder engagement team at MTPConnect, a lot of what we do is building connections. And often one of the things we do is when we're talking to academic researchers or clinicians, inventors, they don't have that background in regulatory, they don't have the understanding, and just putting them in contact with someone who can help is something that often has a huge difference and is really appreciated. So that's an area that we can help, but that's a fantastic answer, Shay. Martin, I'm going to bring this back to CRC-P now. A question we get asked a lot is, how important are the partners in putting together a good application? And is there an ideal arrangement
Sure, thanks, Duncan. So basically, the partners are the CRC project. CRC project is just a phrase to describe what they are. So they really are fundamental to the project and its success. The proposal will need to demonstrate why the partners are required and what their role is in the project, and also what the contribution they're making to it. Obviously, there's obviously a financial contribution, but they're more broader contribution in why they're required to deliver the project. Partners can come from a wide variety of areas. You can have international companies as well as Australian or international research partners as well, large through to small, Commonwealth, state, territory, local governments. You can have the research organisations breadth that I described earlier, even community organisation, industry bodies or individuals. Typically, in terms of the number of partners, we see anything from sort of tip that they'll have that minimum 3, but we've seen some projects that have up to 5 partners, up to 10 partners involved, but we sort of get an average of around about 5 partners on any particular project. I did describe that broader breadth of partners before, but not all of them are. You can have more partners, so you don't only have to have that minimum 3 to meet the eligibility requirements. So that, say, an international university, it wouldn't meet the Australian research partner, but it might be useful to have in the project. But if you do have a lot of partners, like I just mentioned before, you need to be clear about how you're going to manage that number of partners. We have got one project that's got, I think, over 30 partners now. So there's obviously, it turns into a lot of governance arrangements. So you need to have a very strong plan on how you're going to do that. And also, sometimes people keep adding partners just to get more contributions so they can sort of claim they're leveraging more grant. But essentially, if you do have a project that's got lots of funding, then you need to make a strong case on why you can't just do it yourself and why you need grant to deliver that project. A good tip about partners is agreeing them arrangements for how you're going to deliver the project up front. Often we see some sticking points around what's going to happen to the IP. It hasn't been decided before you're going to apply, and then it can delay starting the project because people just can't agree on how they're going to move forward with it. We do assign, in terms of partners, we do require all the partners to provide a declaration, which is their intent, a declaration of their intent to enter into the project should they be successful. And then if you are successful, you'll need to sign a partners agreement, which is agreement between the partners or between the lead partner and the other partners one-on-one about how the project will be delivered. So that's basically the sort of information I have on the partners, and typically we see a bit of the matching contributions from the partners being around sort of, so in terms of the grant, 2-to-1 return on the grants. When I'm saying if you've got asking for $1 million, often we see the average being about 2 to 3 million in total contributions, but we do have a wide variety from anywhere from just on matching contributions through to, I think one of our ones has sort of almost 10 times in contributions as well. But it all depends on what the specific challenge is and what the project is.
One of the questions we get asked a lot is whether a hospital or a local health district is eligible as a partner. And I think the thing that we say is just what you said, Martin, is they can be, it makes sense for them to be part of the project. They just won't fulfill one of those roles of the 2 commercial entities or the research institution, but often really important, particularly in our sort of medical product type space, that you do have clinicians involved in terms of getting access to patients or feedback from clinicians. So fantastic answer. Thank you very much. Adrian, I'm going to throw a question to you now from the Q&As. Claretta has asked, will the MMI, she says, initiative streams, I presume integration streams, be further defined into focus areas with the priority areas, or will it be open to any innovation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So thank you. So businesses that apply manufacturing priorities, having said that, I think we throughout the process, it'll be a broad definition of all those sectors. There's very much a view of not being too restrictive, and also kind of building on the work, what Shay was saying earlier around the kind of smiley curve concept. There, as long as there is a very close link into those national manufacturing priorities and taking that kind of broader view, I would anticipate, businesses are going to be able to go through the kind of competitive grant process. But I would kind of emphasize that, yeah, the businesses will need to be in one of those national manufacturing priorities.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for you, Shay, from Jason in Sydney. How can we best, Jason asks, how can we best connect to potential partners for advanced manufacturing capability?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's probably a couple of ways, depending on where you are, but I guess from a national perspective, we also have the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. So it's probably worthwhile connecting with them. You can go on their website and they have a pretty significant database of manufacturers in the ecosystem. Other ways, I'm in Queensland and we have the Queensland Manufacturing Institute, and that's another way to connect. Nationally, there is the Industry Capability Network, ICN, that you can also sign up for, but that's probably more going in the other direction. That's a good question. That's probably all the answers I have. Duncan, did you have anything from an MTP perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would say two things. So first of all, the Medical Devices Partnering Program based down in Adelaide have a really useful directory on their website too, that it's medical device focused, whereas AMGC tends to be a little bit more broader. So that would be one avenue to look at, Jason. The second is MTPConnect. We're pretty aware of the manufacturers in our space, and we know people generally. We have someone that we can put you in contact with there. So we've got contacts at all of the major manufacturers in this space. So Jason, you've got my email, you know where to find me. We have a few questions, Martin, around eligibility for partners. How are startups treated in the application process for a CRC-P? And do they count as SMEs?
Sure. So startups I generally think they're going to have less than 200 employees, so I think they would be an SME. Then I think there's another question there as well around, I've seen spotted around trading, definition of that. So when we say trading, we mean buying or selling goods, or the intent to buy or selling goods. So a lot of the startups are in that intent phase, so they would be eligible to be a lead partner in general, as long as they have got an ABN and are a trading corporation, so that buying or selling goods, or that intent to. So we've had quite a number of startups be lead partners in CRC projects today.
Absolutely. So yes, startups are eligible, and I guess the lead-on question from that is, can both the commercial partners be SMEs?
Definitely, and I think obviously you can have more than 2 commercial partners as well, but quite a number of our projects have got 2 companies that are not large. So definitely, and it's typical. Yep.
Fantastic. Another sort of nuts and bolts kind of question for you. What's the total funding available in this round? Are you able to give us an indication?
So I can't give a specific number. It should be similar to the other rounds prior to round 10, because that was a bit different. So yeah, we funded typically sort of $20 to $30 million when we haven't had specific additional money for priority areas. But it's because we have the same underlying funding bucket comes from also the larger CRCs. It's a lot of them things depending on how much gets allocated to each stream and decisions of our minister.
Thanks for that. A question from an anonymous attendee, and a nice easy one for you. Are only medical devices likely to gain funding through these grants, through CRC-Ps?
No, so it's much broader. It's across the whole sector. So any area can apply.
Fantastic. And actually, if you look at the ones that were successful in round 9, we had sort of one in the kind of device kind of space, one in the vaccine space, so very much the therapeutic kind of space, and one Glytherics making radiopharmaceuticals. So definitely much broader than just devices. Another question that we often get asked, Martin, is around whether being a participant in a previous CRC-P impacts on your ability to submit a successful application for another CRC-P. So I suppose there's 2 parts for that. First of all, if I've had a CRC-P that's run for 3 years and finished on a particular project, can I apply for a follow-on application? And second is being involved in a completely separate CRC-P likely to affect my opportunity to access funding via this pathway?
Short answer is no. You can apply for. We have one company I think that's running 3 projects at the same time because it has been successful 3 times. Each of the applications is assessed on its own merits, and you can if it's a follow-on project, that's fine too. We wouldn't consider that an extension funding. We don't, when we say extensions, we can't provide you additional funding to do the same project that you're already doing. But if it's a separate project or a follow-on project, or even 2 projects you're are going to run in parallel because your business is that broad that it can manage 2 projects. Whether they have their links between the 2 or because they're 2 completely separate issues, then that's fine. If anyone really wants to look, all of our funded projects, the 154 that have been announced to date, are all on our website with all the partners listed. So if you look through that, you'll spot a few names. The company Defentex has had 3 grants. I think a company called Flame Security has had 3 grants as well to date in the program.
Excellent, thanks for that. Adrian, a question for you from Elaine at the BioMelbourne Network. How early stage can companies be to apply for funds under the integration and translation stream of the MMI? Do they have to have sales or can they be in their early development stage and pre-revenue?
That's a really great question, Elaine. Prior to the guidelines and that medical roadmap coming out, I kind of can't give you kind of definitive details on that. However, the space guidelines that came out on Friday do have some of the eligibility criteria around the type of companies that would be eligible. So I'd encourage you, at the conclusion of the seminar, pull those up. That kind of has a lot of detail around that. I'm sorry, I don't have those guidelines directly in front of me, but my understanding is it is relatively broad. It wouldn't be too, it's not like early stage companies are going to be excluded. It's kind of a relatively broad definition of companies. I think it is the one under the Corporations Act, but I definitely have to take that detail on notice. So please don't quote that as gospel. Go and have a look at those guidelines. So it would need to be a business. It's really those guidelines are around the kind of project and activities. So it wouldn't be kind of the business characteristics so much as looking at those competitive grants. What's the type of project? What are the type of activities under that project?
Thank you. Thank you. Here's a curly one for you, Martin, and one that you, I'm sure, get quite a bit. These questions are jumping around a bit. Does a project proposal need to have addressed issues around IP and patents prior to submission? Is eliminating risk around patents a prerequisite? Exhaustive patent search challenge is expensive. Can a grant be used to cover these types of costs, or is it assumed that this has been addressed prior? IP questions.
Yeah, IP, yes, interesting. So it's not an eligibility requirement that that IP and patents issues, like particularly there's not too much detail on what we're sort of really talking about there, but obviously reducing the risk of the likelihood of a project, increasing the chance of a project is going to be successful through addressing some of these issues might benefit a project. Having, I think, like I said before, maybe slightly different, but having an agreement with what you're going to do with your IP and detailing that to our committee would be useful. When you respond to the selection criteria, we have a section around risks, so that could be one of the risks you look at. But I think I don't think it's necessarily assumed that this has been sorted out, but at least things like you've got access to the IP you need, and the plans for it for the future are in train. That would be of benefit, but not an eligibility aspect.
Certainly something that we at MTPConnect would flag as a risk that needs to be managed where there are difficulties and lots of partners, and not having some kind of, at least, in principle, agreement around who's going to own the IP and the ability to use it. That's something that we would flag. A question from an anonymous attendee, which I'm going to talk about myself a little bit. They say, we're an Australian medtech startup that is looking to start manufacturing our novel device this year. We're not associated with any institute or university, which probably rules us out of CRC-P funding. Do you think we'll be able to take advantage of the MMI funding? If so, what do you think this will cover? Specifically, will we be able to apply for funding to develop in-house expertise, e.g. QMS, production operation, purchase planned equipment, or pay for manufacturing prototypes? So first of all, I would suggest very strongly that you get in contact with your stakeholder engagement director from whichever state you're in. So if you're in New South Wales or ACT, myself. If you're in Brisbane, Andrew Boskill. If you're in WA, Tracy Wilkinson. And if you're in Victoria, South Australia, or Tasmania, Beck Tunstall. And the contact details for all of us will be in the email that we send out after this. There are other opportunities coming up beyond CRC-P and the MMI that we may be able to link you up with. And there are also things around developing in-house expertise, skills training, and that kind of thing that we are doing as part of our READY grant that may be relevant in that space. So if you want to learn more, get in contact with us. That said, Adrian, do you want to have a crack at that one too? Will sort of early stage startups be eligible for accessing MMI funding?
Well, I'd probably go back a little bit around to my previous answer. In terms of the kind of business characteristics of individual businesses, that's not really what we would be looking to target. It'll be around the type of project that they're bringing forward. So, you know, applying into that competitive grant process, it's really around, you know, what's the project trying to achieve, and what are the activities under that, and what kind of support through the government grant can you effectively use to deliver that project. So it needs to be a little bit beyond business as usual. It's not really around just funding a kind of general upskilling or things like that. It really needs to be kind of delivering something new for the business. And in terms of around those kind of more specifics, I'd probably need to take those on notice until those specific medical product guidelines come out, just because that will kind of outline in detail the types of activities that we're looking to target. So to Anonymous, I'd really encourage you to jump onto business.gov.au and look at the kind of manufacturing opportunities there. Sign up for updates through that, and so you'll kind of be, when that project opens. So obviously, you'll be able to kind of see those opportunities as they come through under the MMI, and possibly through business.gov.au. In addition to definitely go and speak to people like MTPConnect, but that has some really good resources around variety of kind of government support mechanisms as well. So that's kind of another port of call as well. So
fantastic. And in that answer, you touched on something that we had a little bit of a conversation around earlier this morning. The MMS uses the phrase scale and scale up quite a lot. Can you talk a bit more about what the intention is there, and what exactly you're talking about when you use that phrase? Yeah,
so I think it'd be really good to talk a bit generally around that, I think, without kind of going into exactly what we want to see. Part of it is we want to kind of in that kind of competitive process, see what kind of proposals are going to be brought by business, because there could be an opportunity for scale that, with our best interest, government, hasn't specifically said, yep, this is exactly what scale looks like. I really think that is, if you look at medical manufacturing and possibly manufacturing more broadly, although I'd probably defer to Shay on this, you have a lot of really, really great smaller companies and a lot of, kind of quite large companies at the other end, and maybe not that many in between. And so we're really looking at, through the MMI co-investment, taking some of those smaller companies and pushing them into medium-sized companies, and then taking some of those medium-sized companies and pushing them into large, and that's going to look, different across all areas of medical manufacturing. A kind of small medical device manufacturer is going to look very different to a medium-sized vaccine manufacturer. So I do not want to kind of prejudge exactly what that's going to look like for all businesses, but I think that's really what we're looking at, is kind of taking some of these companies and looking at taking them from a certain size and pushing them up into that next bracket.
Fantastic. Shay, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I just to reiterate what Adrian was saying, it's one of those challenges when you're transferring a product and go from what is a pilot facility or a small scale manufacturing facility into something that can service a new market or a new product offering. So sometimes what can help, like it varies between manufacturers, but it might be pivoting into a product that requires a clean room to manufacture, for instance. So you need some support to develop that infrastructure to deliver that product. It might be enhancing levels of automation to go from manually handling packaging of your product to having assisted automation or robotics to deliver that service, which enables you to deploy your resources elsewhere to scale up the volumes that you can provide. I think when you're looking at those scale up opportunities, it's really important to look at what are the markets that you currently serve, what are the markets that you'd like to serve, and what are the new market opportunities or new product opportunities, or even new business models that you can employ to grow your current company, leveraging your skills and expertise. And it's something that I completely agree. We need to focus on that, because there is a large disparity between what is our small businesses and our large businesses.
Yeah, and AMGC put out a report in the last couple of years that really highlights that too, that advanced manufacturing is not just about how you make things, it's about your advanced business models and also your advanced processes too. It brings me on to another question for you, I think, Shay. Gregor has asked, how is manufacturing defined, i.e. manufacturing for sale to another party versus manufacturing to support a clinical trial or for your own developments? Do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, yep, sure. And it's a really good question that is specific to medical. So I've actually, if you're talking with reference to grants, it depends on what the eligibility criteria are. But generally, manufacturing for a clinical trial is still considered small scale manufacturing, because in the research and development process for medical devices and products, that's part of the journey to commercialization. And often those numbers, although they're small, you've got to repeat trials repeatedly, or you are actually testing your manufacturing process that will subsequently get you the regulatory approval. So from my perspective, that pilot scale manufacture, or that manufacture that you're doing to deliver test products or clinical trial products, is considered part of manufacturing. Those processes that you design are the ones that are connected to your regulatory approval and will be the ones that you take forward to commercialization. So it depends on what the context of what you're asking, but I would say, yes, that is considered part of the manufacturing value chain.
Absolutely. And maybe part of a gap in Australia's capability at the moment is the ability to make small scale batches of active pharmaceutical ingredients to do trials. So I think a really good answer there. I saw a great question. Okay, here we go. I'm not sure who I'm gonna put this one. Shay, I'll let you have a go at this one. Is a nutraceutical product, plant-based product, a medical product? What are your thoughts?
Oh gosh, that's a tricky regulatory question. So anything that I advise you, I'm not a regulatory professional. So it depends on what nutraceutical, it depends on what the ingredients are and what the claims that you're making. So that's really, sorry, I'm going to bail out of that one because that's really a regulatory question. There's a lot of specifics around what do you intend the product to do? What are you claiming it does? What evidence is out there for your ingredients and how are they classified? Because aloe vera, for instance, is classified in a pharmaceutical way as a certain particular drug that has a known action. So it really, really depends.
Absolutely. From our point of view, MTPConnect sort of sees our area of influence as things that are regulated by groups like the TGA and FDA. So that means we don't get involved with things like vitamins, which aren't regulated. It also means that we don't get involved with animal health. So if you want to understand better, just feel free to get in contact with us at MTPConnect, and we'll be happy to help you out there. Right, I have a question for you, Adrian, again from some of the conversations that we had earlier this morning. You spoke about the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and what it intends to do?
Yeah, no, thanks, Duncan. Really appreciate that question. So the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative is the main part of that modern manufacturing strategy, which is looking at making the Australian economy more resilient to kind of future shocks. So under that, there's probably two main phases of that. There's kind of going to be a quite involved piece of work, mainly led by government, but working kind of very closely with industry, because industry has really good understanding of the supply chains, of mapping kind of what are the kind of critical products for the Australian economy, where do they come from, what are their supply chains, are they things that are made overseas, are they things that are made in Australia, and you know the things that you're making in Australia, where are those inputs coming from? So kind of quite a complicated mapping exercise, kind of seeing what the risks are, things like scenario planning, all those kind of over the horizon pieces. So it's really kind of been influenced obviously really heavily by COVID as the kind of previous really big external shock, but it's not kind of just a COVID thing. This is really looking at what the next disruption might be and what the impacts of that could be. Following on, once that kind of mapping exercise is complete, there is a grant process that is connected to that, and that'll be looking at supporting businesses to make these supply chains more resilient for some of the products that they've looked at. That work is kind of well advanced, but still ongoing. So I don't have too many more details around, you know, is this product critical and is that product not? That work is all still ongoing, but I'd kind of anticipate towards the middle of this year, without kind of prejudging that, there'll be a lot more detail around what those critical products are and what are the kind of grant opportunities for businesses that might be involved in those supply chains or want to move into being involved in those supply chains.
Excellent. Certainly a lot of companies approaching us over the last sort of 9 to 12 months asking how they might be able to access that kind of funding. So we'll look forward to that. Martin, one for you. Can we get both MMI translation and CRC-P grants? And the important thing, part of this question, I think, is does each grant need to cover different projects or activities? Can I double dip?
You can apply for both. You can get funding for both, but not for the same project. So yes, exactly, Duncan. That would be well, double dipping. Government's not going to fund you twice to do the same thing. It gets complicated if you're trying to fund two different elements of the same project, but essentially you'd have to really separate them and call them different projects. So need to be clear on that if you're going to do that. It's obviously difficult if you're applying for two different programs at the same time and you're not sure which one's going to be successful. Essentially, if you were managed to be successful in both, you'd need to choose one of them and decline the offer on one of the on the different program if it was eligible for both.
So certainly a good situation to be in if you manage to get both of them. Not a bad problem to have. We have a bit of a question here again for you, Martin, that I think comes up quite a lot. In terms of partner contributions, is there a typical cash in kind split that characterises successful applications? Is more cash better?
Sure. I'm just going to pull up my data on that quickly. So is more cash better? Probably yes. Like in terms of eligibility, it doesn't matter either way. I suppose the cash has a bit more flexibility around it on what it can be spent on. The staff in kind value is essentially the salaries that you're paying to staff anyway. So it's not too far. It's like cash payment a cash contribution anyway. The non-staff contributions are them sort of in kind, sort of contribution of maybe office space or equipment that's being used. Typically I think I said before, we get about a 2 to 1 return on the sort of grant to ratio. I think the cash is on successful applications is probably around about. So if the grant's $1, I think the cash typically on successful ones has been about 60 cents or so. In proportion to that, and then maybe the in-kind, which includes the staff in-kind as well, is probably about another 1.5, that sort of number. They're very rough numbers, things, but that's sort of where we're at. But there's no right combination. It depends on the project. The leveraging is only one aspect of the assessment criteria. It's one that's easy to sort of run the numbers on, for instance, but it's only one of the sort of sub-criteria of the assessment criteria.
And the follow-on question there is there a range of budget that's most likely to get funding? Like if I ask for the 3 million, am I more likely to get funding than if I ask for 600K?
I think the value for money is an overarching consideration that our committee looks at when they're looking at applications. Obviously, if you're getting 3 million versus 600, you want to be doing 5 times as much as overall impacts as of the project. I'd suggest, yeah, there is. You can look at our list again. There's all our projects are listed. You can see how much they got. There's plenty of ones that got the full $3 million. But there's some good small projects as well that have done quite well. So yeah, probably our average grant's around about 2.5 million, 2 to 2.5. It's sort of been slowly going up a little bit, but yeah, I think in the last round we had the round 10, we had a few smaller projects as well, which was sort of good to see. So probably only ask for as much as you need, and the less you ask for, the more you can put in, the more sort of the grant is leveraging as well.
Great. Another question that sort of, I think we might have two very similar ones. You mentioned partners can be overseas based. If the skills don't exist in Australia, can they also undertake the manufacturing activities? I assume this is a CRC-P question. We have a similar question from someone who has a partner from New Zealand and is asking whether the partner from New Zealand would be eligible.
So you can, international partners, like I said, are eligible. You can spend money overseas. I believe it's limited to 10% of the total project value, which we call the eligible expenditure. That's detailed in our the Appendix B of our guidelines, I think. So have a look at that. But you can spend money overseas. But really, the aim of the program is to build competitiveness of Australian industries. That's sort of the overarching aim. So you need to make a good case why that couldn't be delivered in Australia. In terms of New Zealand, well, yeah, they wouldn't be eligible to be an Australian industry entity. But if you've got an ABN, that's our sort of and trading, like I said before, that makes you considered to meet that as definition. So, but if they don't, they're not considered. Yeah, you wouldn't be eligible, just like any other country.
Fantastic. I think the thing to note for all potential applicants is that the scheme is very competitive. And if you've got, one of your partners, if you're sending a lot of money overseas or you're not building capability in Australia, then it makes it very hard to compete there. A question from Andre, again for you, Martin, may be a difficult one. Will CRC-P projects fall under the R&D tax incentive clawback clause?
I'd say ask the R&D tax incentive. That's, yeah, you can get 132846 to business.gov.au or the tax office. That's not my program.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer. We do have a few sort of fairly specific questions that we're not going to address about people's specific partners. If someone has a question and they want to get onto your team, Martin, what's the best way to contact them?
Yeah, like I said, so the business.gov.au contact centres open extended business hours, so I believe from 8 till 8. So they're really good. They've got lots of agents there to sort of cross lots of programs. They can also give you advice on other programs as well, if that's useful. And if there is an issue they can't help you with, they'll escalate it through to my team as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Shay, a question specifically for you from Oliver at Neuromersive. We would be very interested in connecting with some of these graduates you were talking about. How can they contact you?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on where you're at, but what I've found to be a good model is engaging directly with the universities in your area or with the universities who have a particular interest in the expertise that you're looking for. If it's in the engineering sphere, we have to do at least 3 months usually work experience in order to graduate. And additionally, there's often final year projects, capstone projects that the universities are really keen to engage in with industry to actually do something that has some meat on the bones. They love good projects that are collaborating with industry. And often what I've found is that's a really good pathway into employment. Over the years, I've employed a number of people that I hired as interns originally and had a particular project to look at implementation of a certain equipment in production, or supporting the QMS might be another one. But you can use it as a really good tool to, particularly if you're in a startup, but I've used it when I worked at multinationals as well. But probably reaching out to your local universities or universities that have that area of expertise is a good place to start. The other program that's worthwhile noting though too is probably Apr Intern, which is a federal program, and I think it works out to be about 10,000 you put in and 10,000 comes your way, depending. There's been some really good funding lately that covered 80% of it, but it enables you access to a PhD student to perform a certain project. So you've got to be very specific about what you're after, and then PhDs will apply for that. I do know there has been some challenges with getting specific projects partnered from some of the companies that I work with. So I'm not sure how the availability is at the moment, but I've heard some really good things from that program.
Absolutely, yeah, we've heard some really good things about that. And actually, Oliver, MTPConnect via our Ready program supports a number of Apr Intern programs, which means that your company can get access to a intern for a period of 3 to 5 months with a very, very small outlay from the company. So if that's something you're interested in, again, you know where to find me. A question from Peter Martin for you. What was the success rate on the last couple of rounds, i.e. number of successful grants versus total applications submitted? And can I ask if you would mind maybe commenting on how that has changed from round 1 to round 10?
Sure. So in the, I won't go through all the rounds, but let's just look up the numbers here. Round 8, we had 130 applicants and we funded 24. A lot in that round. We had additional funding for both critical minerals and plastic waste and plastic recycling in that round, as well as open to all other areas. Round 9 was a general round that was open to all other areas, and that was more typical, the amount of funding available. So there were 132 in that round and funded 10 projects at 25 million. So they were relatively high average project value. It's sort of even over that 2.5 million for that round. And the round 10, which was only open to projects in waste and recycling area, I think it was 52. It was low 50s. And we funded nine projects out of that. So, but if you go back to round 1, we had 92 submitted and funded 11 out of that round. So that we have been funding a similar amount the whole time. One of our issues is that we've got more and more applications coming into the program. We sort of, if you look back at round 3 and all this data is available, we had only had 38 submitted in round 3 of the program, funded 13 of that. So that's sort of the highest success rates. But success rates have been sort of going up and down, but sort of we've been funding the same number of projects, but more generally coming in. And to be honest, I'm not expecting this round to be any less, to be probably set a new record for the number of applications. So yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. We have the same amount of funding, and obviously more applications coming in. It's making the success rates more and more challenging.
Certainly based on the number of people that have registered for this webinar, I think we can expect a lot of applications. A question from Viraj, again for you, Martin. Doing some really exciting stuff, Viraj. Do startups need to show that they already have the matched funding or letters of support from existing investors to put more money? If the grant is successful, can you then go to your investors and say, look, we've been successful, we need this cash now? Does it have to be available when you put in the application?
No, you don't have to have the money in the bank. Doesn't have to be available. You need to be able to be prepared to sign a partner declaration that says you're willing to enter into the project, and you'll be able to contribute the resources. Now, that's not a legal commitment. That's a sort of your intent. In your application, you'll be asked to explain where the resources are coming from. So if you're saying you're going to essentially do capital raising, I suppose that possibly increases the risk of your project. I've had a number of projects that have been able to capital raise and successfully do their projects, and we've had some as well that have had some challenges and delays with their projects in due to that reason as well. So I suppose it just is another risk that would be considered by our committee in the overall likelihood of success of the project. But I suppose the nature of research is that some of these things, they all have an element of risk. Otherwise, they'd probably be going without government funding. So that's how I'd respond to that one.
Thank you. Shay, one for you from Jason again. Before scaling up, is it best to start small with an MVP and test the market? Any suggestions? Seems very iterative to get product right, hence the importance of Q&A and regulatory compliance. What are your thoughts?
That's a very tough question. So when you're looking at medtech products, that differs depending on if it's software or hardware, but the burden of compliance that you need to go through in the design and development process, and the verification and validation of your product, both functionally and also for a clinical application, is quite stringent. So it's a bit of a balancing act. Just having an MVP, you need to go through that same process. And then if you want to iterate and improve it, post-approval, you need to go through that same process again and often provide additional regulatory submissions. So in general, I would say MVP would be at the end of feasibility. Your design iteration should occur before you do your design inputs and design outputs and your verification and validation, because the product that you want to go to market with, you don't want to have to change too often. Generally, it depends on the class of device, obviously, and the regions that you're in. There's a lot of variables there. But if we're thinking, I'm just kind of thinking more class 3 complex medical device, every change requires you to go through that entire process again, and often regulatory submissions, and often in multiple markets. So even if you change a process, you might not even change the product, but you might change a critical manufacturing process and go from something manual to something automated. And often that requires some form of regulatory submission as well. So you need to really think clearly about what your product looks like and what those regulatory implications are. I hope that answers your question.
I think that's a really good answer. Thanks, Shay. We have a question from an anonymous attendee about how many people have registered for this webinar in order to gauge interest. And I'll tell you the answer to that. But first of all, I would say, if you're interested in doing something in this space, get in touch with us at MTPConnect, whoever is responsible for your state, because there are other opportunities that are available that could be used to support your project. There's the MMI. There are other programs that we know of that aren't yet public that we might be able to point you towards. CRC-Ps this round, I'm sure, are going to be very competitive. As Martin said, it's likely there's going to be a record number of applications, and we have had 350 people register for this webinar, which is probably about almost twice what we would usually get. Idalia has pointed out that if you're looking to get in contact with the University of New South Wales, she can be contacted at the University of Sydney. If you're looking for a contact at any of the universities, we're more than happy to put you in contact with relevant people wherever they may be. I'm just going to ask, we have had a few questions, Martin, around this trading company term, and that this is different to earlier rounds. What level of trading is required, and where does this leave, I guess, pre-revenue R&D companies?
Sure. So we have had this requirement in at least the last 3 rounds, not probably since about round 6 or 7. It essentially is there because it enables us to provide the funding under the corporation's power of the Constitution, if we're going to get technical, which means there's much more flexibility for grantees on how they can spend the money. what does it mean? Yes, like I said before, it's about buying or selling goods or services, or the intent to, and trading has to be a significant, I think is the word, part of your activities. Look at our guidelines, look at the definitions, it's all in there. It's one of them. And the second part of your question was, can you just repeat that, Duncan?
I think if you're a pre-revenue R&D company, where does that leave you?
Oh yeah, and that's about like if you've got the intent to buy or sell goods or services, then yeah, you'd be trading.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. We're getting towards the end of our allotted time. We do have one final question. This might be for you, and Adrian, perhaps you would like to comment too. Martin, I'll put this to you first. Is the CRC-P program targeting support of novel manufacturing technology development and acquiring such novel tech for small scale manufacturing? The example given is mRNA tech. So it might be usable for R&D now and leveraged later. Even though there's only a small market now, it could be considered a clear national priority based on its novelty and importance with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
I'd say it's that's relevant and sort of the sort of project that would be applying, but I'd say the program's a bit more broader than that, and it's just targeting industry that has businesses that have a problem and how they might need collaborative research to solve it. So yeah, look, that sounds like the sort of project we'd see, and part of our criteria is around government priorities, and that's got a pretty broad definition, not just manufacturing priorities, but the growth sectors and even the broad science and research priorities, but it's actually got a catch-all there for anything else that the government sees as a priority. So yeah, that sort of technology probably would fall into that part at the moment. So it's yeah, that's sort of a relevant project that could be successful.
Perfect, thank you for that. Libby, I'll ask you to bring up our resources slide, please. Just a nice lead on from Martin's comments then. For our panelists, I'm going to ask you to have a brief think about what your leaving thought might be while I go over these. We will send out these resources to everyone who registered, along with a few others. So some resources here. First of all, the modern manufacturing strategy, which is quite easy to find. Even beyond having the roadmap available, there's a lot of really useful insight that you will get from the MMS. So it's definitely worth a read. Secondly, I would point you towards this report put out by AMGC, which talks about what actually is advanced manufacturing. And I think there's some really interesting stuff that Shay touched on around advanced business models, advanced processes, as well as just using new ways of making stuff, being advanced manufacturing. Thirdly, I would point you towards our skills gap analysis that we carried out as part of READY. So we're about to, I believe the final report is coming out in the next week or so, but you can find our interim report available on our website. We'll send you the link to that. Martin talked about aligning with various priorities. The first thing that we will look at as when we're reviewing these on behalf of AusIndustry as an industry growth centre is to see that you have read our sector competitiveness plan. We want to see that you can show that you've read it and show that you align with that. I would also bring your attention to the last webinar that we ran at the end of last year, which was tips for preparing successful commercialization funding applications, which is available both as an on-demand webinar and a podcast. And there are a few other resources that we'll also share with you, including the webinar that Martin did with the Energy and Resources Growth Centre last year, which is also incredibly helpful. So with that, I'm going to ask, first of all, Adrian, if there are any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with.
Always a really difficult question to be, succinct and insightful in a sentence or two. Maybe just building on what you were talking about there, Duncan, I think all those resources are really, really useful. I know I've a couple of times said, watch this space, but while you are watching this space, waiting for all those medical guidelines and the roadmap to come through, absorbing all those materials that Duncan was talking about, I think that gives you some really, really useful context. It gives you a pretty good understanding of how, you know, government and industry is thinking about these things. So I think my little takeaway would be, if you've got the time, I know everyone's really hard and it's time poor, absorb some of those resources, because that should hopefully set you up really, really well when these competitive grants open up.
Fantastic advice. Thanks, Adrian. Martin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not going to say read our guidelines, but definitely use our guidelines as a resource if you're going to apply. So look in them to answer a lot of the questions we've had today. There's also other supporting material there, things to help you get your budget and your contributions right, because it can be you can get some pretty messy applications in, and just like, if you are applying, try to write it in plain English. Our committee is very much a group of generalists. You may not have someone look at your application in your specific area, and please don't leave it to the last minute. Try to apply. We will close the system at 5 o'clock Canberra time on the 25th, and because our department's got the National Measurement Institutes, we think we're pretty sure we've got the right time on that one. And if you want any further information, go to business.gov.au/CRC-P. And there's all the phone numbers and contact details for our contact services centre there as well, to be able to help you.
We will also include the link to all of the documentation in the email that we send to everyone who registered. Thanks, Martin. And finally, Shay, your thoughts for us, please.
I just wanted to say, when you're going through, if you choose to put in this application, don't think of it as ticking boxes for a grant application. The way these are designed is to get you thinking about the business and the value proposition and what this project is and whether it's going to deliver you and the greater industry some kind of sustainable value. So just think about it as an exercise of supporting your business, because the process that you go through for this should actually be useful to you. And if you're finding that it's not, then there's probably something wrong. But I think generally, though, I really believe that Australia is teeming with the intellect and initiative needed to produce these high-quality medical products. And as the industry transforms, we must collaborate to build this exciting and prosperous future. So look at collaborative research projects are a really good opportunity to find that innovation and get some partners and deliver some value to your business that you didn't have before. So I'll leave it at that.
I completely agree, Shay. It's an absolute privilege and one of my favourite parts of the job, to be able to be talking to the people who are putting together these applications. There really is some fantastic work being done. In terms of a final thought from me, everyone I talk to, I say, think of your mantra as industry identified problem, industry-led solution, and outcomes focused. And that's what I tell everyone. And if you can't write your short paragraph overview that everyone gets to see and clearly articulate those things, then you really need to go back and have a think about that. I would like to thank our guests for joining us. Really appreciate everyone taking the time. I'd like to thank BioMelbourne Network for partnering with us today to bring this seminar. We will make this seminar available on our website as an on-demand video and a podcast, and it will usually be up in about 48 hours or so. And finally, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. If you would like to get in contact to learn more, you can see on the screen right now the stakeholder engagement team. And we love to talk to you about these kinds of things, me so as more so than anyone. So please feel free to get in contact. We will ask you to fill out a very brief feedback form as you leave. And thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks to our guest panelists. And we wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. And we hope to connect with you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.